All right, welcome again. So today we're gonna talk about this book in relation to what we've been chatting about the last few days here with all about the elephant and the rider. So I hate to burst anybody's bubble, but if you've seen the movie or read the book, uh, I think what the author is trying to get across in this book, and I'll give you lots of evidence to support it, is that these two are one and the same. So they're kind of left a question at the end of the story about who is who and who represented each character and the animal and everything else in the story. And I think their position is that this is his animal portion of his own mind. So the mammalian portion of the mind, if we think of the triune brain with the three levels of like a reptilian, mammalian, and human brain. So I'll give you my evidence for that. So, just to recap here, my point was with what I gave in the last lecture is that there's not one of these that's really better than the other. This girl could be riding the elephant, and the elephant kind of has better relationship. And this one's more kind of built on discipline, but it's an external control on the animal itself. So there's not one that like I know this one looks better, but it's not necessarily better because the rider, when we're in our developmental stages, going through our different brain waves as we go through the sort of frontal lobe, which is the one that we relate to the ego, really doesn't develop until the ages between kind of 7 and 12, and then really 12 this takes over as kind of the brain wave that has more predominance in the mind. And it's not really predominance necessarily, but it's just like the mind serves the ego more than it serves any other goals that were in the mind before. So keep in mind, this person has learned during the developmental stage of 7 to 10, just like we talked about with the Aztecs and other groups. They try to remove this ego as much as possible so that the rest is left, and a worker person is created by kind of suppressing the individual portion, which is the ego part. And this one, they kind of grow in concert, but despite how it looks is so positive, it's not necessarily a positive thing because the animal just kind of follows the direction of this woman up to the point where she is no longer going to be listened to because the animal needs something else. And that's exactly what the life of Pi is making as a point. So I'll demonstrate this here yet. So if we look at the life of Pi, I'm going to use a lot of images from the movie, but really the book is where it really becomes clear as far as what their purpose was in writing this. So if we take some of these ages, Pi talks about his life before 7, but really when he gets into detail, he's kind of getting into around age 7. Before that, it was just kind of just passing notion of like what happened before and how he was named. So his name is Pasine Molitor Patel, and he was named after a swimming pool. And at this age, 7 is when he was taken under his uncle's guidance and started to be taught how to swim. And it became very ritualistic. And this is very common when people start training their mind at this age. Here's a quote that kind of demonstrates this. Swimming instructions, which in time became swimming practice, was grueling. But there was a deep pleasure in doing a stroke with increasing ease and speed over and over till hypnosis practically. The water turning into molten lead to liquid water, from molten lead to liquid light. So we get this sensation. Remember how we were talking about going back into previous brain waves and how that's sort of like hypnosis? And he actually uses the word hypnosis here. So it's kind of a way of suppressing the developmental mind after age 7, which is developing the sort of ego portion of the mind and really making it the higher functioning portion, which has more say in what happens. Pi grew up in a zoo. And we typically have a somewhat negative view of zoos nowadays. And I think some of that's fair. But I think that it's also relevant to say that Well, I mean, we were once living in the wild too, right? And we brought in, there's things that we like about the world that is the civilized world, you could say, and there's things that we probably like about the natural world. So, like, why people maybe go camping as much as they do. Maybe we're missing something that we had a connection with at one time. But he basically said that animals, just the ones at the zoo, just want their own territory. And a lot of times when they get released, they'll just come back to where their territory was, even if they get released. So it's not a matter of like being released and like running free like you're being let out of prison. The animals will generally kind of make peace with whatever surroundings they're in, and will kind of make okay with that until something really scares them or really freaks them out. He talked about a mouse that lived with vipers. So we have a picture here and the same thing, and this happens sometimes with people that own snakes. Is the snake won't eat the mouse, and then it'll a mouse or rat in this case, and it'll just leave it be inside of the cage. And what happens is the snake will often eat many other rats, mice, but it'll leave the one that it's kind of made terms with, and they'll live together. And they'll live together kind of just maybe because they're getting something from one another. You can see the rats laying on top of this python here. And the rat needs some sort of connection, right? It needs a mammal. It needs a connection with something else. So it kind of makes closer quarters with the python, knowing that it needs that sort of connection in itself. And the viper seems to sometimes allow that as well. It's not just an animal that just only thinks about eating. It has other needs as well, right? And we keep in mind that this is sort of, if we look at this as far as the mind, we have the reptilian portion, then we have the mammalian portion, and then we have the human mind above, which was basically the optics we've used so far and how to maybe best understand how the mind works. Oh, I forgot I put it there. But anyway, yeah, reptilian and then mammalian, so the autonomic part. So it shows how these two elements of ourselves, with maybe perhaps different goals and needs, can live together if they feel like they're going to get what they need from that situation. Pi kind of references as zoomorphism. So the way that animals, if they live together in close quarters, will kind of find ways to meet each other's needs, despite whether they're the same species or anything else. They'll just live together as long as they're getting what they want from that situation. And this is similar to the one with the reptile as well, right? And here is my cat. So I would say that this is kind of the same situation, because my cat lives with me. We both gain from the situation, and I think that's kind of true for every person that has an animal. Is they have an animal that sort of they make that connection with, because maybe you don't have necessarily the strongest connection with the animal part of other people sometimes. It seems like when we get older that we only make sort of logical connections with people, and maybe we're just missing that sort of holistic sort of just caring, only relating to the other creature like a dog does, right? And a dog just only wants to be with people he cares about and just wants to be connected with them in some way, at sort of an intimacy sort of thing. Well, at age 12, Pi, who is starting to get bugged about his name being Piscine, changes his name to Pi. And he declares this in front of everybody, but this is at the age of 12, coincidentally, you could say, perhaps. And then he also starts practicing all religions around this age. So he starts practicing Islam, he starts practicing a little bit of Christianity, and also he was raised as a Hindu. So this was something that was previously in his learning, and that was his first sort of connection with like a sort of superhuman, superpower sort of entity, is which the way the movie talked about it anyway. But I think he was trying to make the case that all four of these are kind of like religions, and I'll give more support of that yet. But this is when he kind of changes and takes control of his own life and changes his name. There was a lesson that he went through when he was about this age, and it was trying to feed this this tiger called Richard Parker. And I'm not sure if you remember me talking about, but Richard Parker is something we'll talk about a little bit later, as this is a reference to Edgar Allan Poe, Edgar Allan Poe novel that he wrote, and we'll talk about that in a sec. But anyway, his father catches him doing this, trying to feed the tiger, and he wants to prove a point to Pi that the animals, so like if we think about this as zoomorphism, animals aren't caring about people in the same way people care about each other. So he tries to feed him the animal, and then the dad ties up, right where the boys are sitting, he ties up a goat, and then the tiger tears into the goat and kills the goat and rips it back into the area. And this is supposed to be proving to them that it's just, for the animal, it's just survival. That's all the world is about, is just survival. Base instinct is all it has. It's not like us. And he talked about this at the end of the story as being one of the lessons that saved his life. And we'll get to that in a sec. So after this happened, though, Pi kind of made this quote: "Life lost its beauty, patterns and numbers going on without meaning, like my irrational name, Pi." So Pi will go on forever, and it seems like there's these randomness throughout the world, right? And then he said when he lost that sort of connection with this animal part, that everything just didn't really mean anything. It was just all randomness. There was no connection to anything. And he sort of had a similar disenchantment when it came to religion. So he had kind of a moment where he had those three that he followed. So we have Islam, we have Hindu. Maybe I'm wrong here. Maybe these two are mixed up. Maybe they are. I think this is Islam. And then we have the Christian guy. And then they're all saying, you can only choose one of these. You only have to have one religion. And then Pi just said, basically, he's like, well, I just want to, he's like, well, he actually gave the quote that I gave already to you guys about Gandhi saying that all religions are true. So he just wanted a connection with something otherly. And he says, I just want to love God, is what he said to all three of these. And that moment kind of made them all embarrassed, because they sort of realized what they were trying to do to this kid, and that he really just wanted to do that. And I think he sort of humbled them at that moment. And then they all just kind of walked away from the situation. And that was in the book. And this was kind of one of those transformational moments for Pi as well. The one that really kind of sells this, though, is he had two people. As he's growing up, he's kind of finding his way in the world, and he's trying to put those two sides together of himself. And he has two Mr. Kumars in his life. So he has Mr. Kumar, a science teacher, and he has Mr. Kumar, a Muslim baker, that are kind of role models in what he does. And these two guys come to the zoo, and they come to feed. And keep in mind, like I'm saying, these are all relating animals to people, right? And part of our own psyche. And that's the point I'm trying to make here. So at this time, I think his psyche was supposed to be represented as the zebra they come up to. So I have this kind of quote from the book here. Mr. Kumar and Mr. Kumar looked delighted. "A zebra, you say," said Mr. Kumar. So this would be the Muslim baker. "That's right," I replied. "It belongs to the same family as the ass and the horse." So of course this is Pi. The Rolls Royce of equids," says Mr. Kumar. So this side, "A wondrous creature," says Mr. Kumar. "That's one giant zebra," I said. So this is kind of the neutral in between. Mr. Kumar gives the scientific name. I'm not going to try to say it. And then the other Mr. Kumar says the religious kind of connotation towards this. So like basically like praise God. And then just him again saying it's very pretty. And we all looked on. And then what he did is actually he gave each one of them half of the carrot to feed the animal. So that we have this very symbolic thing of like sort of the rational part of himself and the sort of religious part of himself, and then splitting something between two people to give to the animal. And this is a way of kind of relaxing his own animal. And we can see these two parts of his psyche. So this is sort of like the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere of his brain sort of being made relaxed and accepting of the world through these two mutual sort of understandings that happen, and him represented as the zebra at this point. Oops, that wasn't meant to happen, but we'll leave it. And once his boat went down, so of course we're skipping a whole bunch here, but his ship eventually goes down with his family, is being represented here as only his mother that was left. So his mother gets represented as the orangutan. There was a sailor that was represented as a zebra that was injured. And then we have the chef of the boat that is represented as a hyena. And his animal part of himself is underneath the tarpon right now and hiding. So metaphorically hiding. But you have all these people that represented different people and how they reacted to the situation. So everybody became their animal selves. This guy just found a way to survive no matter what. The mother was a nurturing mother. So in the story, the name was Orange Juice. And Orange Juice was a maternal animal they had at the zoo. Because these were all their animals, supposedly representing their animals from the zoo. They got cast out when they were moving all the animals to Canada. So I should explain that a bit more. But they decided to leave India. Then they filled up the boat with all their animals they were going to sell in North America. But when the boat went down, we kind of have these two options of how to see it. So we could see these just animals that survived and came onto the lifeboat too. But like I'm making the point of here, these are actually animal representations of the people. And it's easier for him to stomach the fact that they're just animals. So he gave up his human self. And keep in mind, in the book, it wasn't as clear at this moment. But as soon as his mother was killed by the hyena is when his animal self really came out. So he was threatening him with a knife. Then the tiger comes out. So the tiger represents his animal, ferocious, defending sort of self, and just predator kind of thing at this moment. After the other animals died inside the boat, there was a period where his spiritual self, so his sort of human side, I guess you could say, lived apart from his animal self. So if this part, which would be basically the rider of the elephant, this would be the spiritual part. And it could go either up or it can go down. And I'd like to talk about that more, but I think you get the basic premise, is that is this guy in this situation. So there's two things here physically, but metaphorically, this is just his psyche separating. So he's got a spiritual self, he's got his animal self, and we'll talk a little more about it yet. Eventually, he trains his animal self, and he trains them how to live and how they're going to live together on the boat. They kind of inhabit the same place once he trains him how to be, and he trains him in a very formal way, which is kind of the same sort of way we talked about with the Aztec children and how they're trained during this age, with a little bit of like tough love. And that's kind of how he did it with Richard Parker too. Eventually they made peace with each other and they lived on the boat kind of peacefully with one another, knowing that they're going to need each other for survival partly. And then there's a point where they were almost dying. The animal self was almost dead. He was almost dead. And he just says, I thank you for my life. I'm ready now. They thought they were going to die. And then he comes upon an island. So the island, it seems it's the only thing that saves him. He eats parts of the island, and the island digests itself basically. So digests what's coming into it. And then he finds his tooth. I think they're trying to get across here in the island, and you can really see it in the movie. It's kind of a little less obvious in the actual book, but it's shaped as a person. So this is his own psyche and his body eating itself in order to stay alive. This is the only thing that saved him at this point. It's just like everything turning on itself to save life. And you can see right here that it's a shape of a person, the body. And that's why he found the tooth as well, right? Would be eventually he'd take away everything until there was nothing left but teeth. But he left in time, so he didn't eat at it forever, I guess you could say. He eventually washed up on the shore. He was lost for 227 days. Why 227 days? What does it mean? Well, 3.14 is an irrational number, so pi, which was representing his pi side of himself, was an irrational number and is rationalized as 22 over 7. So showing that there is a cause. So remember what he said about after his father's lesson, that everything seemed like it was just irrational numbers going on forever for no reason. And so basically what this shows is that there was a reason. And there was a overall cause to everything once he really kind of attached himself to understanding it. And there's also 100 chapters of the book as well. So this is kind of Pi saying it's been faked. Pi was kind of a fatalist. In the name, Richard Parker itself is also kind of interesting. As we were talking about before, I've kind of alluded to this, but we'll just go through it right closely. So what is in a name? In the story, the narrative of Arthur Gordon Prynne of Nantucket was a novel about 4 men who were shipwrecked and drew straws while starving to death to see which one of them would survive. Richard Parker drew the short straw. Richard Parker, the cabin boy, was killed to help the rest survive. People were disgusted. Poe swore the story was true, but the novel never sold. People looked through all the records and no evidence of it ever happening, so everybody's like, oh, Poe, you're just being crazy. And then 46 later, a boat sank. 4 men were on the boat, decided to eat the cabin boy, named Richard Parker. So this really kind of pulls it all together as far as Richard Parker being the animal part of himself that's just looking to survive. And he needed to survive in that situation and do things he would never usually do in order to keep his body alive. And Richard Parker became this tiger part of himself that came out. So keep in mind, we all have this part of ourselves. And you can have a good relationship or a disciplinary relationship where you're kind of working together really well, but that doesn't make it not true that this is still an element of yourself divorced, and this person can serve something better, or it can serve something that is, I wouldn't say worse, but definitely not maybe as beneficial to everybody or the whole situation. It's not really looking for 2 conclusive goals. It's like looking for 2 separate goals if you go this way. But I think that's the point that the book's trying to make. If you guys have any ideas or different takes on what you saw, please let me know. Love to hear what you have to say. But anyway, have a good day.